evening, passengers. We are on our final approach to the electric pyramid, where your host Michael Parker will be joining you shortly. For the remainder of the flight, we ask that you keep your arms and legs inside the craft and your mind open, as we will encounter the turbulence of new ideas and fresh perspectives. If at any time the alternative viewpoints you absorb while inside the pyramid become too distressing, simply say to yourself, "I'm happy. It's like a tomb without a roof." Good day.
Greetings, truth seekers, paradigm busters, new world order, civil disobedience, freedom fighters, free thinkers, higher mammals, good people of all types. How's it going? My name is Michael Parker, and welcome to the first episode of the Electric Pyramid, coming to you as always from a undisclosed location here in Hollywood, California. And in the words of Tony Stark, it is good to be back. I tell you what, I haven't been on the radio for a while, a few years, and my good friend and confidant and producer, Joe Kiernan, has asked me to come on board with the good people here at Freedom Slips. And I just want to say hello, Joe, and to the crew, and say I am really glad to be here.
Mike, can't be happier. I'm glad to be here. I'm very excited about this program. I'm happy to have you back on the air. Many people are. And I'm looking forward to a good program. I'm happy to be here, man.
Thank you so much. Nighthawk, everybody has been very cool to me, man, and getting us set up and ready to go. And I'm going to look forward to bringing you guys a lot of interesting information. One of my passions all my life has been looking into strange and unusual situations, mysteries. I'm a curious person, just like Joe. And, I see things in a thousand shades of gray, and nothing is black and white. So hopefully we'll find some interesting things to talk about over the next couple of months. Next week, we've got Sylvia Schultz. She is a paranormal investigator. We're going to be talking about her new book, which I believe is Fractured Spirits. And we've really just got a lot of good people coming on board. Chad Meek is going to be with us in a few weeks. He's going to be talking about his uncle, Van Tassel, and his new movie regarding Giant Rock. And we've also got some stuff about Laurel Canyon and the ties between the rock and roll scene of the late 60s, early 70s, and a possible tie to the military-industrial complex. So that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. We've got a lot of really good shows. We're going to talk about a lot of different kinds of topics. We don't want to be stuck in one rut here. And we want to always think critically and keep a smile on our face and have fun and hopefully inspire the audience to do the same and ask questions.
Well, it sounded good, man. I'm really looking forward to those shows, especially Laurel Canyon.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting because I've worked for some of the people in question before, so I'm going to have some questions about those artists as well, and that's going to be a really good one. The author is LA-based, so he knows his stuff. So that's going to be, I believe, on June 12th. But today I want to kick this thing off. I don't want to hold anybody up with chit-chat. I want to get right to it. So the first thing we're going to do, you guys, in my old show, if you ever listened to Dark Matter, which was several years ago on a different internet radio station, I always like to start out the show with just a few interesting things that have happened during the week that I've seen in the press. And here in Southern California, this week was actually pretty dark and pretty depressing. There was another mass shooting here in Southern California, and that is something that we're not going to get into tonight because there's plenty of other places to hear about that. It's a really terrible incident, and so we're not going to go into that tonight. But we're going to keep it light and start with a few interesting stories. And after we do that, we're going to bring on our guest for the evening, my friend and colleague Scott Deschaine, who I was lucky enough to get to work with towards the end of last year in Marfa, doing an investigation of the Marfa Light. So he'll be coming on shortly and for the remainder of the show. And right now, I'm just going to get started with some of the craziest things I saw in the news this week. This first story comes to us from India. It was in the Telegraph. A guy, Dean Nelson, was reporting this out of New Delhi. The family of one of India's wealthiest Hindu spiritual leaders are fighting a legal battle over whether he is dead or simply in a state of deep meditation. His Holiness Sri Ashutosh Maharaj is the founder of a religious order with an estate worth an estimated $165 million. His wife and son claim that he died in January of a heart attack, but his disciples at the ashram have refused to let the family take his body for cremation because they claim he is still alive and has simply drifted into a deeper form of the samadhi meditation he promotes as a pathway to self-realization. So they've frozen his body. They're going to preserve it for when he wakes up. And his body is currently contained in a heavily guarded commercial freezer at the ashram. Yeah.
Wow.
So this guy, his family says he's dead. His followers say he's just meditating. I think he's probably dead. But according to one of his aides, who asked not to be named, Maharaj has been in deep meditation. He has spent many years meditating in sub-zero temperatures in the Himalayas, and there is nothing unusual in it. He will return to life as soon as he feels, and we will ensure his body is preserved until then. His wife and son have filed a court application calling for an investigation into the circumstances of his death and for his body to be released for cremation. His son claims his late father's followers are refusing to release his body as a means of retaining control over his vast financial empire. So imagine that. It's all about the rupees.
It sounds like Ted Williams. To pass his head around a few times. But
that's right.
I know he's frozen somewhere. Yeah.
That was the baseball player in the cryogenics, right?
Right. I think the son wanted to keep the head and didn't care too much about the body or something like that.
Amazing. So, Joe,
what is amazing about this, though? I mean, if the man's been preserved, I'm assuming prepared for death, that there's still an argument whether there's meditation.
Here's what's interesting. The Punjabi police, they initially confirmed that he was dead. A high court later dismissed the status report, and they said it's a spiritual matter, and the guru's followers cannot be forced to believe that he is dead.
All right.
So
that's some deep meditation, my man.
That's very deep,
right.
And
very honorable.
I'm guessing he's not going to come out of that, but I could be wrong. In far less surprising news, in New York City, they are launching a war on rats. They are going to target these so-called rat reservoirs, which are areas where rodent populations survive and thrive, such as subways, sewers, and city parks. I'm not sure how they missed the city hall, but one city council member described the rat problem as an epidemic. The city will hire new inspectors and spend $600,000 for rat indexing to track and reduce their population. I suppose that's preferable to rat profiling, which is insensitive. It's welcome news for many city residents who claim the rats, some the size of small dogs or cats, are running rampant in their neighborhoods. One person said, when I walked out the other morning and there were like 6 rats running around, I just said, I'll never get used to this. Another man in Washington Heights said that I see about 20 rats a day. One woman said that the rats have infested her building on 154th Street where one rodent bit the neighbor's daughter. They're taking over. It's madness, she said. A sanitation worker said he had to shake and kick bags of garbage to scatter the rats for fear they'll jump up and bite him. Well, all this sounds like New York to me, and I'm not bagging on New York. I love New York, but it reminds me of the brilliantly prophetic words of another early 70s wise man, Mr. David Bowie, who certainly knew his way around the Big Apple, and he had this to say. Joe, can you drop that beat for me?
The size of rats and rats the size of cats and 10,000 peoploids. Small child.
Oh my God!
With a sterile transplant, we got packs of dogs assaulting glass fronts of lavender, ripping out and whacking length and shiny.
Joe, those were simpler times.
Those were the easy days.
Those were the easy days.
Those rats have grown tremendous since I've left.
They are an invasive species unto themselves, and they've moved in, and they're growing. All right, so our last news of the day comes to us from the Amarillo Globe News. It's reported by Russell Anglin, and this is a story of commitment. It's a story of dedication, a triumph of the human will in the face of severe adversity. On Monday, Molly Schuler ate 72 ounce steak dinners in fewer than 15 minutes at the Big Texan Steak Ranch in Amarillo, Texas. We witnessed history, Big Texan owner Danny Lee said. If there's a zombie apocalypse, I want to stay away from that girl. She walked in here, and she's one of the Danish smallest ladies I've ever seen try the 72-ounce steak. Schuler is a competitive eater from Bellevue, Nebraska, and she finished her first medium rare steak in less than 5 minutes to set the record for the fastest time to eat the dinner and the sides, including a baked potato, shrimp, a salad, and a bread roll. The second one, I wasn't really going for time because there was no point. I had to do it in under an hour, and I was fine. So, this is obviously a woman with great talents, but she's saying she's not finished yet. Schuyler says that she plans to return to the Big Texan with the goal of eating 3 of the steak dinners in one setting. Personally, I believe she makes a stronger alchemical statement by stopping at 2 of the 72-ounce steaks because that's 144 ounces. And 144 is the 12th number in the Fibonacci sequence, and it's also the largest one to be a square. So, Joe, I think if she's going to be a true artist, she's going to have to know when too much is too much.
It all comes down to the law of the squares, Mike.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that is your weird news for this week, and I hope that was enlightening, or at least brought a smile to your face. I enjoy finding the wacky stuff in the world. There's a lot of dark, heavy things happening every day, and that's usually what's on the front page. So I dig deep into the stuff that kind of makes me smile, and those are some of the things that made me smile this week. But now for the remainder of the show, the real meat and potatoes, as it were, the electric pyramid, the cornerstones. We're going to have a man on who really kind of spun my head around. And one of the things that I love most about looking into these subjects, whether it be UFOs or cryptozoological subjects or mysteries or conspiracies, is I love it when somebody hits me with something that I completely did not expect, or that I had looked at in the past and, just didn't give a great deal of credence to and just thought it flimsy, or it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And in late 2013, I had the good fortune of being involved with a television show on the Travel Channel called America Declassified. And they contacted me. I had some friends over there who knew that I knew about some of these subjects, and they were interested in doing a show on the Marfa Lights. Well, I grew up in Texas. I've heard of the Marfa Lights all my life, and being interested in UFOs and things of that nature, I knew a lot about Marfa, but I actually had never been out there. And they told me that one of the angles that they wanted to pursue on the Marfa Lights was the possibility that these lights were not just a naturally occurring situation in the form of maybe plasma, or they're not car headlights, which is what most skeptics will tell you that they are. Mirage is some trick of light. But there was a gentleman that they were going to have on the show who had a completely new hypothesis regarding these objects, and that man was Scott Deschaine. I met Scott, and we spent several days driving around the dusty plains of Marfa, and I got to say, the guy laid out an extremely elegant hypothesis for what these things are, and not only that, he is just a scholar and a gentleman and a fun guy to hang around with. And so I thought the most appropriate thing to do would be to have Scott come on the show tonight so that he could further lay out some of the ideas that we were only beginning to touch upon in the initial episode. If you guys want to see that episode, you haven't, it's still available on iTunes. Just go to America Declassified. It's the 8th episode. And that episode is entitled something to the effect of Martin Luther King and Marfa Light, something like that. But it's still out there. Who knows? It may even be on a torrent site. I don't know. But it's out there. You can see it for yourself if you've not seen it. And without further ado,
fantastic.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was fantastic, man.
And we were lucky that something happened. I was very concerned that we would go out there and we might come home with nothing. I was very worried about that.
Yeah.
But it all worked out. And so I don't want to bore you guys too much. I want to start asking this gentleman some questions. So without further ado, Scott Deschaine, how are you, my friend?
Hey, Michael. Thank you so much for asking me to come on your show. It's an honor to be here. Congratulations for getting on the radio, and I can't thank you enough for the opportunity to talk with you again. It's great to be speaking with you again.
Well, it's great to be speaking with you. And Scott, I've got to say, and I mean this, as the person who's been interested in the UFO subject since I was a child, and that was a long, long time ago, you were one of the first people that I've met to just hit me with something that was totally original, and I know that there are other people who've had similar ideas, which you'll touch upon, but I just hadn't looked into it, and you really gave me food for thought that I'm going to take into this situation from here on. So, not to mention you were a lot of fun just to hang out with. So I think we need to just get into this. I think, first of all, what people will want to know, because you're different than any other person that I know in the regards of the subject of UFOs. And when I say UFOs, I mean that in a literal sense. I don't mean extraterrestrial craft. I mean that they are unidentified flying objects, per the abbreviation. Tell me what your hypothesis about UFOs is.
Well, Michael, first I want to say I'm kind of an all of the above sort of guy. So what we call UFOs may be extraterrestrial spacecraft. And a lot of them are undoubtedly misidentified aircraft, misidentified planetary bodies, atmospheric phenomena, optical phenomena that we don't understand. But if you look at the evidence really closely, I'm going to hypothesize that a lot of what we call UFOs may actually be organisms that live in our planet's atmosphere.
Okay.
There are, looking at the evidence, there's so much noise around the topic, and this is why I enjoy talking with you about it. You're very familiar with the whole circus of UFO research and UFO studies, and there's so much noise around it. But when you look at the evidence and you try and put some kind of filters on the evidence, if you get down to the best reliable evidence, I would say that most of it could be explained by the possibility that what we're seeing from our ground-based viewpoint are organisms that move through our atmosphere, that at least part of their lives they use our atmosphere as a habitat.
Mm-hmm.
I think that some of them may move from sea to sky and back again. Some of them may be native to our planet's atmosphere. We think of, we live on the surface of the Earth. It's a very small slice of habitat. But really, we can't live 10 feet above the ground, and we can't live 10 feet below the ground. So we have this perspective, and we tend to interpret everything from our perspective. But really, when we start looking at the atmosphere, we live at the bottom of a huge ocean of air. We know that in our planet's oceans, there are all kinds of living things. Mm-hmm. Now, our atmosphere that moves around our planet has more than 5 million times the volume of our Earth's oceans. And we know that in the ocean, there's an incredible variety of living things. In one drop of seawater, there may be 1 million bacteria and 1 billion viruses. And we know that moving through the oceans, there are all kinds of amazing creatures. We haven't even explored 10% of the ocean. We're continually finding new species there. And when you look at the surface of the ocean, there's not a hard line there. There's not some kind of barrier. It's more a surface where there's a constant interchange of the liquid and the gaseous water vapor in the atmosphere. We know there's some organisms in the ocean that move from the ocean to the atmosphere. So what we see in many UFOs seem to resemble some of the organisms that we see in Earth's oceans.
Okay, give me an example of an organism that moves from H2O to air.
Well, one of the most common ones that we see in freshwater are the mosquitoes. They live their larval form underwater.
Yep.
And then they raise to the surface of the water. They actually stand on the surface of the water, on the surface tension, and as they emerge from their pupal state, then they emerge and fly through the atmosphere as the adult mosquito. Now, some of the most successful animals in our oceans are the marine invertebrates, the jellyfish and the squid. Now, squid rocket out of the water sometimes for up to a mile. They've been observed zipping out of the water, and they jet. They're like living jets, and they move across the water for up to a mile through the air.
Scott, hold on. Did you just say, okay, maybe I misunderstood you. You're saying that squids have been witnessed projecting themselves a mile through the air?
Yes.
Or did I?
And those are some of the smaller ones. Now,
that's a phenomenal feat for a biological creature, Scott.
Well, there's video of manta rays
Sure.
And stingrays lifting themselves up out of the water. They don't. They're leaping out of the water, but then they quickly return down to the ocean. But squid, they have the fins on the back of their bodies, and they expand and contract their entire bodies to force air through force the fluid water through their bodies, and then they lift themselves up out of the water. And some have been observed for traveling for up to a mile out of the water. Those are some of the smaller ones. Now we know that squid can grow to gigantic sizes. In fact, we know that there are squid in the oceans that we haven't even discovered yet. So it's hard to explain when you hear reports of a sailor waking up in the morning and he looks up in the rigging of his sails and he sees a giant squid caught in the rigging of his sailboat, and you have to wonder, how did that giant squid get caught? How did it get caught in the rigging?
So there are, Scott, there's stories that happened, that people woke up and saw squids in their sails.
Yes, sir, absolutely. In fact, there were some cases where fishermen who were out fishing had to actually they had to dodge the squid that were zipping over their boats. They were actually getting attacked by them. They were getting hit by them as the squid were zipping up out of the water. Now, now, Michael, you know a lot about UFOs. What would you say are the two most common shapes that people report of UFOs?
Well, there's a cylindrical shape or a disc, right? Right.
There's like the two broad categories of like the disc shape, right? The saucer shape,
yes.
And then the cigar or the rocket shape.
Right, the cylindrical, yes.
Right. Interestingly enough, those parallel two of the most successful forms of invertebrate life in the ocean, and those are the jellyfish, the saucer or the disc-shaped jellyfish,
yes,
and the rocket or cigar-shaped squid.
Yes. And
now, if you look at, if you start looking at the atmosphere as a habitat, and you start looking at UFO evidence with the possibility, with the eye, the eye of a naturalist, and think, well, what if? And I'm not saying that this is. I'm just saying, what if? You look and you find that there's actually at least 10 parallels between what we call UFOs and what we know about marine invertebrates, the jellyfish and the squid.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you want to go through all of those, but there's some really fascinating parallels. The first is the way they look.
Certainly.
When people describe, this is one of the. I think the answer to a lot of the UFO question it is not one answer. I think there's going to be a lot of different answers, and this is one of the reasons that this hypothesis is so attractive, is because the variety and number of UFO reports. I mean, millions of people have seen these things, and the way they describe them is so varied and it's so weird that it's hard to imagine, what could be causing this. But if you consider that these things might be a variety of life forms, that kind of fits in with the whole idea. We know that nature plays out all kinds of different variations on the same themes, and it fills all different niches of habitats. So that's one of the things that is attractive about this theory, is that if there are living things in the atmosphere, they would present a huge variety, and that's what we see among UFO reports. An incredible variety of objects have been reported, and an incredible number of objects have been reported. But the first way that they resemble marine organisms is how they look. People describe, like the saucer shapes. One of the things that's interesting is that they say a lot of people describe them as having a blurry or an indistinct outline.
Yes.
Sometimes, right, there's sometimes a dark center with a blurry outline, and sometimes people describe like a trailing tail or like a tentacles from the object.
Mm-hmm.
They describe them as looking like parachutes or ice cream cones or badminton shuttlecocks. And these are all, if you look at those shapes and you compare them to the variety of jellyfish, they're very similar in shape. And the same with the squid. People describe the rocket shapes as tapering at one end. Some of them describe the object having fins that don't seem to move but seem to stabilize the object as they move through the sky, which is very similar to how the squid rocket through the waters. Both the jellyfish and the squid are ideally suited for moving through a fluid environment.
Yes.
And that's exactly what we find in our atmosphere.
Okay, so that brings me to the question then, and I have a lot of questions because Scott, I've been doing my jellyfish homework, and if these are some form of gelatinous invertebrate, like a jellyfish, how are they making this transition from the water to the air and subsisting there for long periods of time? I mean, you and I have spoken about this before, but the audience has not, and so I want you to explain to me and the audience how this type of a creature, if it does in fact exist, how do you think this animal would suspend itself in the atmosphere? We understand how they float and fly in water, but how would it exist in an ocean of air?
Well, that's an interesting question. One of the biggest questions I get from people, they go, well, if these things are up in the sky, how do they stay up there?
Right.
How come they just don't fall? And that comes from our perception. We live on the ground, and we don't even think of the atmosphere that's around us all the time. But there's huge oceans of air, of water vapor and gas moving above us all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So these objects don't have to. I mean, it's not like there's something empty and they have to be lighter than air. It's not like the space in our atmosphere is empty. It's full of gas and water vapor and minerals, and all these objects have to do to stay afloat is be lighter than the material that's right below them. It's not like air has a certain density. There's all kinds of different densities of air, and all they have to do is remain, less dense than the material, than the fluid that's right below them. Now, jellyfish, there's two different. Again, we're talking about two large classes of potential creatures here.
Mm-hmm.
Jellyfish are made mostly of the medium in which they live. So,
yes.
You're talking about a marine jellyfish is mostly salt water. It's something I think like 97% salt water. And you can see when a jellyfish washes up on the beach, it'll very quickly evaporate. Then leave no trace. Now, if these objects move through the atmosphere, we might expect they are made mostly of water vapor, of the gases, which are in the atmosphere. And that would be another reason why they're mostly invisible to the naked eye, and they're usually visible only in special lighting conditions. But that would be one of the reasons. That would be one of the ways that they might possibly move through the atmospheres by being the same density as their environment. Now, squid are another story. They are actually, in addition to being masters of jet propulsion, they actually chemically control the buoyancy within their bodies. They can raise and lower themselves at different density of the environment. And now, whether that's happening in the atmosphere, that's for future research to determine.
Scott, okay, on squids, you're saying, I don't even remember the terms you just used for that, but if I'm understanding you correctly, they are able to adapt their body to exist within varying types of pressures. Is that right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Okay. How do they do that?
They generate different chemicals within their bodies that allow them to be more or less buoyant as they move up and down. Now, if you think of some of the descriptions of some of the early UFOs, a lot of them describe airships, and even now we talk about giant cigar-shaped things that move around and seem to float through the atmosphere. And if you look at them and so the way some of them are described, it sounds very similar to the descriptions of squid. If you look at them, they're really amazing creatures. And this brings us to another aspect of the description of the way they look, of the appearance. People describe these as having a metallic appearance, mm-hmm. or a shiny shape, and you think, well, that from our perspective, we think, oh, maybe that means something manufactured.
Sure.
But when you look closely at nature, nature's engineering, if you look at a jellyfish or if you look at a squid's skin, it's just amazingly smooth and amazingly refined looking.
Indeed.
So perhaps that's what people are seeing. I can't say for sure, but.
Well, Scott, I think I even sent you this article, but I was doing some reading this week, and I came across, now anywhere I see jellyfish or squid, I think about our conversations, and I read something this week where the comb jellies are now thought to perhaps be the single oldest type of animal on the planet, which displaces sponges as the original animal on the planet. I'm sure you're aware of that, right?
Well, no, I wasn't.
Okay. Well, this is a brand new. This is 2014. I think I sent it to you, but I just happened to see it the other day.
I did read that. Yeah.
Okay. But here's what blows my mind, because I will go out on that speculation limb with you all the way as well. Let's say this. Let's say that jellyfish and comb jellies. First of all, the strange thing about these guys is that they have a nervous system that is created in a different form from the rest of the animal kingdom. And it was beyond the scope of my explanation of the types of chemical compounds that made it work, but it's different than the way most animals' nervous systems work. So if these animals are in fact the oldest existing animals on the planet, we could go full-on sci-fi here and say, well, look, they've got this huge jump start on the rest of us. So, yes, perhaps they've found ways to become incredibly stealthy and evolve into animals that can live in aquatic and air biospheres.
Well, that leads us to one of the big questions about UFOs in general. I think one of the questions people have is, why are these things piloted by intelligent beings? And what about the possibility? Excuse me.
Right.
And what about the possibility that maybe these objects are themselves intelligent? And it brings into question our whole concept of what is intelligence. From our human perspective, intelligence means, well, they act like humans. But if you look at jellyfish, they reproduce in a variety of different ways, sexually and asexually, so they can reproduce by the millions. They can survive adverse conditions. If conditions are unfavorable, they can simply dry up into a little tiny microscopic disc and then start growing again when conditions are favorable. Scientists have found now that a jellyfish can actually revert in development when conditions are unfavorable. So they're in effect, they're achieving some kind of immortality. They can go backwards in aging. They also have a nervous system. We have 2 eyes, which allows us to see in 3 dimensions. And some jellyfish have 27 eyes. Now, how are they perceiving the world? They make their own tools, which are these stinging cells, and they produce some of the most powerful neurotoxins that we know. They're incredibly successful organisms. So who's more intelligent? To me, that in a way, that success is in itself a definition of intelligence. But if you want to go to the next way that these organisms somehow resemble marine invertebrates, the UFOs resemble marine invertebrates, we talked about lights, and that's another way that they resemble marine invertebrates is in the use of light. Now, people describe UFOs having a variety of lights. Some of the way people describe lights from UFOs, they say they were beyond our ability to describe. They were colors that they couldn't even put words to. And people have described UFOs seemingly to using light to attract, to scare, to interact with each other. They seem to interact with each other. And these are all the same ways that organisms use bioluminescence. Mm-hmm. And jellyfish and squid are both bioluminescent organisms. And they both use light in a variety of different ways. They have different strategies for producing light. In fact, that's one of the ways that we might consider people sometimes describe UFOs as being there 1 minute and then suddenly disappearing. They're suddenly gone. Now, what if these organisms don't really disappear? They just simply turn out the lights.
Sure.
And then you can't see them anymore. You can't perceive them anymore. But that's one similar way. Jellyfish and squid both are incredibly advanced users of their own forms of living light through a variety of different techniques.
Well, one other thing about squids that always kind of creeps me out is these are incredibly intelligent creatures. And I've seen footage on the internet where squids will literally learn if they're in a laboratory and there's multiple tanks. Squids will climb up the glass walls of one tank and through a tube to get into another one to open a clam or something. You've seen stuff like that, probably.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, these are extremely adaptable and innovative creatures.
Yes, squid have some of the largest eyes in the animal kingdom, and they also have some of the largest nervous systems in the largest nerves in the animal kingdom. So their reaction time is faster than we can even perceive.
Which is unnerving.
It is. It's very unnerving, and that's one of the, when you start looking at this possibility that maybe UFOs are these kind of advanced creatures that are moving through the sky above us all the time. It's a little disturbing, but in a way it makes sense from a naturalistic point of view.
Certainly. Well, let me ask you this. When I had encountered only at the edges talk like this before, I kind of would immediately steer away from it because I just didn't buy it. But when I started speaking to you, it made a lot more sense. And there are other people who have had these ideas before. Could you speak to that?
Absolutely, yes. It's not a unique idea from me. One of the first investigators, as explained, Charles Fort, he explored the possibility. Some of his descriptions of some of the objects that people were seeing in the sky, he toyed with the idea. He said that it seemed no more improbable that looking at the atmosphere, it would be full of life, than looking at the surface of the ocean and thinking, oh, well, there's no life in there. You look at the surface of the ocean, you don't see all the teeming life forms in there. And the same with looking at the atmosphere. You don't see it initially unless you look under special conditions. Kenneth Arnold,
yes,
who in 1947 sort of sparked off the whole UFO craze then. He studied UFOs for the rest of his life after seeing those discs.
Yes.
And now I had thought that he concluded later on, and then most people don't realize this, a lot of UFO researchers know who Kenneth Arnold is, but they don't realize that he concluded that he thought that most of them were natural flora and fauna of the atmosphere, like fireflies. Now, he has some fascinating stories. He collected stories from pilots about their UFO experiences. And he has one that sticks out is one pilot saw what he called a ray fish, this giant, looked like some kind of fish that came to him through the atmosphere, and the edges were rippling as it approached his ship.
Like a manta ray or a stingray or something?
More like an oarfish.
Shape?
What people mistake for sea serpents. Have you ever seen those things?
Yep.
Yeah, and he said that the edges were rippling as it came towards him. Now, I just heard an interview with Kim Arnold, Kenneth Arnold's daughter, and she described how he, during his initial sighting, thought that these things, he said the discs were pulsing with the same rate as a human heartbeat. And his initial reaction is he thought they were alive. And I think he got frustrated. She seemed to imply that he got frustrated later on as people were taking the topic in different directions and going towards the extraterrestrial hypothesis, when his initial gut reaction was that these were some kind of living things. But he later on was very clear that he thought that they were some kind of natural flora and fauna of the atmosphere. Actually, Project Saucer, the U.S. Air Force's first study of UFOs, one of their possibilities, they said that many of the objects acted more like animals than anything else. So this is not. Ivan Sanderson, the naturalist who formed the Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained, wrote a whole book about the possibility. Trevor James Constable wrote a couple books. One was called They Live in the Sky, another was called Sky Creatures. Now, the difference with the hypothesis that I'm putting forth, a lot of the prior explanations thought there was some kind of jump in they thought that they were some kind of cosmic energy or some kind of creatures from another dimension. And all I'm saying is that these creatures are very similar to creatures that we know exist now. The only leap of faith that you have to make is to think that our atmosphere, like our oceans, might be a habitat. That's the only jump, because what we see in UFO evidence can all be explained by what we currently know about the creatures that live in our oceans.
Well, Scott, that's the primary thing that I've taken away from knowing you. And when you made the point about the sheer volume of air in our atmosphere versus the volume of water that's in the oceans, and you understand just how significant and gigantic that is, and it's just a matter of elements being mixed together, it makes sense that things would be able to exist there. Now, the skeptic's going to say, well, Scott or Michael, why am I not seeing them? Which you've already partially laid out. However, in 2014, it could be argued, Scott, where are these things? It's kind of like the Bigfoot question. It's like, where's the scat? Where's some tracks? Man, where's something, where's something that I can say, this is incontrovertible evidence that your hypothesis is correct. If the ocean of air above us and around us is teeming with the type of life that you are describing, now where's the evidence of that in a biological form that we can take to a lab and put under a microscope?
Well, looking at the past evidence, there's a ton of evidence. You know that there's a ton of footage out there. There's actual physical evidence. There's tracks and traces. There's all kinds of reliable multiple witness stories. But to really prove the hypothesis, we would have to go out and get new evidence. Mm-hmm. So that's the way you would prove it. Now, if you want to look at the past evidence, there are literally thousands of UFO videos, and I've looked at literally thousands of these things, and some of them are awful. A lot of them are hoaxes, like we talked about the noise subject. But there's just a lot of UFO evidence out there, a lot of footage and a lot of photographs. But
Scott, I want to actually exclude that part of it because I'm kind of leading the question, I admit, but but here's the thing that I don't like about UFO footage, and as a person who always studied it, and here's something that to me makes your argument actually more compelling, is that having looked at the phenomena all my life, it would always bum me out no end when I would see some objects, and if I were to make the step that this object is intelligently guided or that it is some kind of a manufactured craft, then why is it behaving and navigating in such a flaky way? But if you put the spin on it that it is perhaps an animal or an organism and is not so much a craft that has to follow stricter aerodynamic values, but could perhaps just float with the wind or navigate in a biological way, that makes sense. But stepping away from the photographic evidence, let's talk about angel hair, things like that, things that would be left on the ground by a biological creature that is existing.
Well, let's not totally discount. I know why you're frustrated about the visual evidence, but that's one of the reasons people get frustrated, is because a lot of it doesn't seem to show mechanical craft. But if you look at it, a lot of some of the best evidence does seem to show parallels between the marine invertebrates. I mean, there's some amazing footage of objects. This is another way they parallel marine invertebrates, is their movement. Like you said, they don't. It's not like there's some intelligent being moving around. It's just it looks like it's something doing it, going about its business. But the way that the people describe the movement is, a pulsing movement. They describe the falling leaf motion of an object moving back and forth as it goes there. But so there's a lot of good visual evidence. But in terms of physical evidence, there's a lot of physical evidence too. People say, well, if there's jellyfish moving through the atmosphere, how come there's not jellyfish falling out of the sky? Well, actually, they do fall out of the sky. People have reported all kinds of blobs falling out of the sky. One of the most interesting cases was in 1950. A pair of policemen in Philadelphia saw this 6-foot-wide purple glowing object descend into a vacant lot. And when they got there, they pulled over and got over there, and they saw this disc-shaped blob on the ground. And it was pulsing, and these guys said it looked like it was alive, and it was, glowing purple and pulsing. They called 2 other policemen there, and they checked it out, and as they watched over the course of 45 minutes, this thing slowly dissipated. It just evaporated, just like a jellyfish on a beach. But these guys said that they thought it was alive. Mm-hmm. Now, in 1999, you talked about angel hair, and for people who might not be familiar, angel hair is the term that's given to filaments or like threads that are oftentimes found trailing off of UFOs. Low-flying UFOs sometimes emit this substance that's sometimes sticky, it's sometimes like translucent, and almost inevitably this material, this angel hair, evaporates. It dissolves into thin air after a very short time. Now, if you look at microphotographs of angel hair, and you compare it to microphotographs of jellyfish tentacles, it has almost exactly the same shape. Now, in 1999, some people collected samples of angel hair in Sacramento, and they submitted the angel hair to a laboratory, and the laboratory found some of the same proteins and some of the same minerals that one might tend to find in a jellyfish body. Mm-hmm. So now this leads to another thing. If anyone sees a UFO or sees any angel hair, do not approach it. Do not get close, because jellyfish.
And why is that?
Well, jellyfish and squid are some of they're apex predators. They're some of them are very passive, but some of the larger ones are advanced predators, and they use a variety of techniques and strategies to hunt their prey, and some of that includes using a variety of very deadly neurotoxins, which leads into the whole idea of effect on humans that we can get into a little bit later. But that's one form of physical evidence, is the angel hair, the filaments that fall. Another form of physical evidence, there's actually been the blobs. People, in addition to the one in Philadelphia, there's a whole term called puertercer. It's a Welsh term that is literally translates to star rot, or rot of the stars. People see glowing meteors fall to the ground, and when they go to investigate, they see a blob that's glowing that again disappears. People have seen blobs fall out of the sky. In the 1980s, a policeman in Dallas saw a blob fall into his backyard, and he went over to approach it, and the thing started crawling up a telephone pole like it was trying to get back into the sky. So there's an incredible variety. There's an incredible variety of reports of blobs falling from the sky and jellyfish-type objects falling out of the sky.
Well, Scott, I know we're going to come up on the end of the first hour in a minute, but there's two stories that haunt me that I learned about through you. And the first one, I don't know if you'll recall this, but when I was reading your paper that I believe appeared in Fortean Times in 2012, it was a great paper, you mentioned a boat. I don't remember what kind of sailing boat it was. It was a large ship, and this mass washed over the boat, and it was a giant jellyfish. Do you recall that story?
Oh, yes. This is to give an idea of the size which jellyfish can attain. This was in the Indian Ocean.
Yes.
It was a steamer called the Kuranda. It was in 1973. And there was a storm, and the front of the ship was going up and down in the waves. One time it went into the waves, and it didn't come back up. It was snared. It was snagged by a giant jellyfish. And this jellyfish was so big that it covered the front of the steamer. Now, imagine like a wave of gelatin, this gelatinous body of this creature, covered the decks of the ship 5 feet deep. Now, the Kuranda sent out a distress signal, but in the meantime, when the sailors were struggling to get this giant jellyfish off of their deck, one of the sailors was lashed by the tentacles and actually subsequently died. And another ship had to come and rescue him. They sprayed boiling hot water onto the jellyfish to dislodge it. But that is in the Indian Ocean, and what we see there are also reports of giant glowing wheels of light. People have described, I don't know if you've heard about those, Michael, the giant glowing wheels of light in the Indian Ocean.
Yes.
Where sailors will describe, these things are miles across, and they show lights moving around in like a circular motion. And
but could that also be, I didn't mean to cut you off, but could that also be a school of these organisms as opposed to one large organism? Or take it a step further, it's a bunch of the organisms acting in a hive-type mind as one organism.
That's possible. They actually analyzed the light, the movement of the light in some of these wheels of light, and they found that they would have to be communicating really rapidly, faster than we know any animal communication, to have that kind of light. So the question is, what are these wheels of light? Are they some kind of physical phenomena, like some kind of glowing plasma, or are they some kind of giant bioluminescent organism? But that's just coincidental to the Kuranda story.
Well, one more story that blew my mind, and I saw this on YouTube, and you and I discussed it because first of all, a giant jellyfish overtaking a ship, I just didn't even conceive that was really even possible, and that story really kind of freaked me out. The second story is the family in Australia who I believe were driving east from Perth, I believe, and I believe it was the mother and 3 sons. And this object starts following them and then lands on their car. Do you recall that one?
Oh, I sure do, Michael.
let's talk about that.
That was let me tell you one more quick story. I don't know if I told you this one about jellyfish. In 1988, a French fisherman and his family were having a vacation at the seashore, and the fisherman said that a jellyfish the size of a Volkswagen rose up out of the water, grabbed his wife and two kids, and then went back into the ocean.
And that was
now,
it?
This guy was charged with murder. The police charged him with murder, and but he passed a lie detector test, and he refused to change his story. He said, no, this thing came out of the water and grabbed my wife and kids, and they were never seen again. But those are marine jellyfish. Now we see if you read a lot of stories about UFO attacks, you think, people think, these are little men in spaceships coming down and grabbing people and grabbing animals, but I don't know, when you read the descriptions of some of these attacks, they sound pretty similar to the behavior of these predators, the predatory animals. And one of the more famous ones was the one you described, and it was in Mundrabilla, Australia. And it was the Knowles family, and they were riding along a highway on the Nullarbor Plain. It's kind of a remote area of the outback there. And they were riding along, and they saw a light in the sky. And there were a couple other cars on the highway, and they saw a light in the sky. And they were stopped, and they looked, and the light was zipping around, and it seemed to zip by their car. Well, they stopped the car again, and the light stopped in the sky, turned around, and came back towards them. So it was a mother and her 3 sons. And they said, well, we better get out of here. They hopped in the car, and they started driving away. So they were driving along, and this object came right on top of the car, thumped on top of the car, and picked their car up off the ground. The mother said she reached out the window and felt what seemed like a spongy object on top of the car. Mm-hmm. And one strange thing is they described their voices seemed to be very high. There was some kind of weird, like dust that was that filled the interior of the car, some kind of noxious smell. And they described the smell as being like decomposing bodies. Mm-hmm. And the object dropped the car on the side of the road and burst the tire, and then it went zipping away. And the mother's arm was inflamed after she touched the object. Now these people swore that this was true. All 4 of them saw it. There were other people on the road who saw this object.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I've seen their video testimony. Something happened to them.
They don't seem like the type who would make something up for attention, do they?
Not at all.
Yeah. Well, that's just one case. And there's many cases of people who've had physical effects from close encounters with these objects.
Well, let me ask you this: the odor and you said that I believe that you said their voices tended to get high, almost as if they were experiencing like a hallucinogenic type situation or a time slip or something. Are you saying that maybe that's the neurotoxin being excreted by the organism?
I don't know about that, Michael. It could be as simple an effect as the change in air pressure, as the object created some kind of vacuum. Now, we know that jellyfish only have the one orifice, which they use as a mouth, and it's an excretory organ too, in the middle of their body. So this thing grabbed the top of their car, and they're smelling decomposing flesh. Maybe they're smelling the contents of its guts from its previous lunch.
Well, I was looking at some other material that you'd sent me a while back, and you also bring in the topic of cattle mutilations. I mean, I saw one photo of a cow draped over the top of a telephone pole.
Absolutely. Again, the whole topic of cattle mutilation is a real mystery, and it doesn't make sense unless you interpret it as you just think, what if? And that's how I like to explore this topic. What if?
Yes,
if this
agreed.
is the case, what do we find? Now, what if there were aerial predators? What if there were creatures moving out there that actually came down and preyed on land animals? What would we find? Well, if you read about the history of the cattle mutilation, there are thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of reported cases. You know, Michael, about, this was considered a crisis during the 70s and the 80s, and the federal government had big investigative teams going out trying
Scott,
to find out.
I don't mean to interrupt you, Scott. I'm very, very sorry to do it. We're going to head into the break right now. We'll be back in just a few minutes, folks. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Michael Parker, the Electric Pyramid. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Electric Pyramid with Michael Parker. My name is Joe Kiernan. I am here helping Michael do the producing for the evening. And first, I would like to remind everyone that this is the world's largest listener-supported radio station here at freedomslips.com, Revolution Radio. I do encourage everyone at home to make your way to freedomslips.com. I highly encourage you to get into the chat room. A lot of great people, interesting conversations. There's 2 live studios running it all the time. We had Studio A, Studio B. You can find the scheduling for all. I think we're pushing about 80 different programs now, virtually covering any topic you could be of interest in, or a topic that you might even become interested in you had no idea you were in before. However, if you could make your way over to freedomslips.com, and there's also a donation button. If you could leave a donation for the station, this does go to provide us the platform we do have to broadcast these programs and to further continue to grow our listening area and listening base. So without further ado, I don't want to waste any more time with Michael's great program here. I'd like to bring Michael Parker back in with Mr. Scott Deschaine.
Joe, thanks so much. And before we jump back into the conversation, I just want to remind the audience that next week we are going to have a visit from Sylvia Schultz. She is the author of a new book, Fractured Spirits, The Hauntings of Peoria State Hospital. So if you are into ghosts and kind of paranormal activity, as it were, or you're just into history and want to learn about the history of psychotherapy, this is going to be a great show because Sylvia has done a really good job of compiling the actual history of Peoria State Hospital, which was actually a very progressive place. Back in the day, you did not want to go to a asylum or hospital, as it were, but this particular hospital was designed to be very progressive, and yet there were still probably some hard things that went on there. Anyway, she's going to be on the show talking about her brand new book, Fractured Spirits, The Hauntings of Peoria State Hospital. The week after that, we have Dave McGowan, Weird Scenes Inside Laurel Canyon, which I'm very excited about. We'll be talking about the rock scene of Laurel Canyon in the late 60s, early 70s, and a possible connection to the military-industrial complex, which just seems nutty, but we're going to be looking forward to that. And the week after, we have Chad Meek, who is the nephew of the notorious George Van Tassel. So we hope you guys will continue to listen to the show and send me your comments and let me know what else you want to talk about and hear. And in the second hour, I'm going to continue to ask Scott a couple of questions that I think that we need to cover. But Scott had questions that he wanted to pose to Joe because Joe is experiencing the phenomena with a greater frequency than probably anyone that I have known. And so I want to allow Scott the chance to ask Joe some questions later in the show about that. But for the time being, Scott, let's get back to, we were talking about just some of the wilder cases and the cattle mutilation aspect that could possibly be the result of an airborne predator.
Right. This is one of the problems with the whole UFO topic is so much of it, if you think about it in terms of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, the little guys flying around in spacecraft, it doesn't make sense. Why are they coming down and taking tens of thousands of cows? Why are they attacking people? But if you think about it in terms of aerial predators, well, it starts to make sense. Now, a lot of the information in the UFO topic is so weird, and the stories are so bizarre, they just gets kind of shunted off down the memory hole. I don't know if you've heard about this one, Michael, but this is kind of related. Why talk about cattle when we can talk about people?
Go for it.
In 1956, on the White Sands Missile Testing Range in New Mexico,
where good things always happen,
an Air Force sergeant and major were out looking for a missile that had landed. Now, the men that were out on the Jeep, and they parked their Jeep, and the sergeant walked over a sand ridge, and he was out of sight, and suddenly the major heard these terrible screams of pain. He went running over. He thought maybe a snake had bitten the guy or something. He went running over the top of the dune, and he saw this large, silvery, disc-shaped object, and it hovered about 15 to 20 feet over the sergeant, and there was some kind of tentacle that reached out from the bottom of this object, and then it wrapped around the sergeant's legs. And as the major watched the tentacle drag the sergeant right up into the bottom of the object, and then it flew away. And the major ran back to the Jeep and radioed the base, and they confirmed that radar had actually detected the object. So they scoured the range, and only 3 days later, they didn't find the body until 3 days later, and they found the sergeant, and his nude body was found 10 miles from where the object had taken him. And there were signs of horrible mutilation on the body, very similar to what is described in the cattle mutilations. So that's one case of a direct witnessed event where something actually picked a human up and took it away and killed it. Now, we hear time and again about people having effects being distant from the objects, and that's one of the ways these creatures hunt, is they may extend their tentacles way a long distance away from their main body. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to caution people. If they see these kind of objects in the sky, to really stay away from them, because the toxins that they emit, the stinging tentacles that they have, may extend a great distance away from the main body. There's a case of a policeman in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, who was at a stoplight on a deserted road, and he saw this light in the sky above him, and he came out of the car, and he looked up, and this glowing light was moving back and forth in the sky above him, and he felt like a stinging heat on his face. And he watched, and then the object finally moved away. When he went to work the next day, everybody was teasing him. They said, "Oh, what, you fall asleep under the tanning booth?" Because one side of his face, the side of his face, was all red and irritated. And this is a common experience among a lot of UFO witnesses who had close encounters, is the kind of skin irritation, the conjunctivitis. And as a matter of fact, one doctor did a study of all the physical effects on UFO witnesses who had physical harm from getting close to UFOs. And there are minor to extremely major short-term and long-term physical and physiological symptoms. There was damage that was included, like sunburn, a burn, eye irritation, nervous damage, skin damage. And if you look and you put those effects right next to the effect of the neurotoxins from jellyfish and other marine invertebrates, they're almost an exact parallel. But the nice thing about this particular hypothesis is that it's not something that we can just take on an act of faith. It gives us the possibility to go forward with further study to see if there's actually something to it. So one way that these objects, that UFOs seem to parallel marine invertebrates, is they appear in likely habitats. Mm-hmm. Now, as I mentioned before, the atmosphere isn't just this empty space above us. There's all kinds of stuff moving through the atmosphere all the time. And when we look at different parts of the atmosphere and look at it like a naturalist trying to find habitats for organisms, almost every level of the atmosphere we look at, we see different kinds of weird phenomena that may actually be organisms that live there. One of the things that Michael and I did, we actually went out on a field study in Marfa, Texas, to try and see if we could get a good look at those lights. That's one phenomenon that we see all around the world. If you think of the atmosphere as an ocean, that ocean extends even into the crevices, the caves, all around the surface of the earth. The atmosphere goes down into there. Now, if you think of creatures sheltering, they might shelter in caves and crevices around the earth. And indeed, all over the planet, we find these mystery lights or spook lights. Yes. And Marfa is one of the more well-known lights. But that kind of leads us to Joe's experience, and he's seeing these recurring luminescent phenomena, which I am chomping at the bit to ask him about.
Well, let's do that.
Tell us about what you're seeing there.
Well, I don't even know where to begin in the sake. You definitely stirred up my curiosity. But in regards to these here in South Carolina, there's a good amount of these orange color lights that appear to just possibly go to the ground or go close to the ground. And I say this because they do go behind trees. However, I haven't seen them interact with the ocean, but there are a lot of claims of that, but I can't say that sure myself. I do see the lights go in that direction. They do go towards the ocean, sometimes come from that direction, but it's something I've considered with an entry in the water or coming from the ocean water. It's a popular topic around here between a lot of people who see these lights.
So where are they normally seen, Joe?
Well, I could only speak for really the people I've met around here in regards to it. I'm in South Carolina. I'm pretty close to the state line of North Carolina, right on the coast. And when I see these lights, I don't have to go off my back patio. They're very close by, just within a few hundred yards.
Wow. Now, are you looking inland or out towards the ocean?
I'm pretty much looking when I'm in my backyard and I see them, I'm pretty much looking south, straight down the coast.
Okay.
If I would have to really turn 90 degrees to go towards the ocean, I'm pretty much dead south right there.
I'm gonna grill you, Joe. Is that all right? Do you mind?
I don't mind at all.
Okay, because I wanna learn all I can about these things. I heard about your experiences and how you videoed these things, and I'm just fascinated.
Yeah, I've gotten some pretty good video. You know, what I want to tell people about these is I don't go out and search for them. If I'm away from home and I happen to film them, it's only because I see them and have a camera.
Okay.
But I have gone with the intention with others in hopes of seeing something. That never pans out. That's just the case. I can't explain any of that. However, if I'm in my house and you say, hey, I'm just going to step outside and see if anything's happening, you bring a camera. I take a camera with me because that's when it does happen. You go outside and it's happening. It's on. And the first cameras I had, they weren't any good. I was just getting little orange dots that, in anyone's opinion, including my own, it could have been anything. Looking at it in review, it just could have been a light. It's just no depth perception. It's not picking up anything. So I progressed in the cameras trying to get a better shot, more convincing, because my intentions originally were, and Mike Parker would tell you, it was so overwhelming to me, but I wanted it to be handled by someone who knew what they were doing, and it wasn't me. I was trying to say, here, there's something incredible going on here that people should really take a look at. I'm not the guy for it, but I'm going to keep looking the best I can and try to track down what it could be, or more importantly, what it could not be, and rule out aircrafts. And then I started watching flight trackers and speaking with other people. I've met several people now who see this, so we try to triangulate at times, or just try to get a better idea. But it's all pretty much in a general area from my eyes. And
Joe, I want to ask you a question, because when you first started experiencing this, and we were kind of emailing back and forth, for the audience, Joe and I know each other prior to this through a mutual friend, but when you started experiencing this, and you were asking me what I thought, and I was doing a little bit of research, one of the things that I was seeing is that where you are has a history of these lights, and predominantly they were kind of oftentimes this orange light that you're describing. And I guess I have a question for you and for Scott. My question for you is, how many times are they orange versus some other appearance? And then Scott, after that, does the orange color mean anything to you in a biological sense?
Okay. There's primarily 99% of the time, it's one of two colors. It's either a orange color, some say a little bit more yellow. I'm sticking with orange. I don't really see the opaque or the lightness of it. It's more, you know what it looks like to me when they glow orange? It looks like very hot iron that's about to be hammered out in a smith shop. It looks like that glowing iron look.
Joe, let me ask you: does the camera catch the true nature of the light, or is it just kind of a rough approximation?
I think I get a pretty good shot of it. I think I do.
Yeah, that's one of the problems. Is sometimes the cameras and technology isn't up to getting the real picture. But you're saying it's pretty close to what you're actually seeing.
Yeah, I've got myself a decent broadcast camera now. It shoots in pretty much zero light settings, so even on a dark night, I'm picking up all the trees and pretty much I'm able to get the depth perception I need. But it's not entirely what I need, because here's the other side of the answer there for you, Mike. Is the other color I see is a bluish white. Now, the difference between these two is I will see the bluish white color as a solid spherical light, but it's a constant light. It doesn't turn off. It doesn't blink. It doesn't get any brighter or less bright. It's pretty constant. But when it's this color, they're never stationary. When they're this color, a white or a blue, they kind of just cruise along. They obviously make no sound. I don't want to say it travels like a balloon, because it's nighttime, but they kind of look like they have a destination picked out, let's say southwest, and they don't deviate from that course or altitude. It just goes along.
How do they move, Joe? Do they seem to? Do they move in direct lines? Do they bob up and down? How do they move?
Well, these solid color ones, they really do stay on a solid line. They really do. It boggles me, because these solid ones like this, I've seen planes, even single-engine planes, go quite close to these things. At least from where I'm standing, they appear to be pretty close enough that I would say, what the heck was that? Maybe turn my plane around. We've had hits on the radar where there's things there and then they're not there. Anomalies, right? That's what it is. They just don't know.
Really? So what radar are you talking about? Like in local airports radar?
Yeah, we often check with Myrtle Beach radar and several other flight trackers, and I don't anymore, but in the beginning I was calling a Shaw Air Force Base. Now, with the orange lights, the great difference between them is I'm really fascinated with the orange ones, because now when they're traveling, and I say they because it's never a single orange light, it's always two or more, usually 2 to 8, I would say. 8 being the rarest. Maybe more 2 to 5 is more common. But when they're traveling along, they let out very intense, bright flashes, almost like a strobe, but not as frequent as a strobe would be. They don't. I wouldn't refer to it in any regards as a blinking that I would see from any FAA light.
Does it flare up and down? Or?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, and it doesn't change its intensity either. And there doesn't seem to be a pattern. Like sometimes it'll flash like a strobe, just really fast, many flashes, and then not so fast. But when they're traveling like this and there's all these flashes, it's very hard for me to tell if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, because it appears that it's either moving back and forth, left and right. It's all over the place. It's almost like a group of birds, really, because they kind of sway back and forth and up and down, and kind of like a school of fish. They're just all over the place.
That's amazing.
It's hard to tell if it's one thing or many when it's doing this flashing.
Let me ask you a weird question. Do you ever see them seem to split apart, or is there maybe one and then all of a sudden there's two or more? I mean, do they ever?
Yes, I have, but generally they stay together. Even when they're separated, it's kind of they're still together in a per se, just maybe a little farther apart than what I'm used to seeing. But I will say, when I have my eyes on these things, and I'll tell you guys, it wasn't until I've gotten my most recent camera that is my best camera. I was never able to capture these bright white flashes with any camera I had. It was driving me crazy. I couldn't understand why I couldn't get them, because they're just so bright to the naked eye. You know, I would imagine it would have just been a mess on the camera, but I wasn't getting anything. I get them pretty good now, but when they will come to somewhat of a stop, or maybe just stop traveling, and they're in an area of my sky, and it's a pretty common area. If they're under intelligence of any degree, they're picking a pretty good spot, because I live in the Myrtle Beach area, which is a big tourist destination here on the East Coast. So there's not many places in my county that are undeveloped. And this area that I'm looking, this is one of the very few areas that's undeveloped, and it's protected land, so it won't be. So if it were anywhere, you know, if they kept traveling a little more to the west or to the east, they would be lighting up over neighborhoods, and when they do, a whole lot of people see them. And now that it's becoming a little more common around here for people to speak about, there's a lot more footage coming out, which helps out a lot. It used to be if I filmed it, it was just myself. So nowadays, if I film something, there's a good chance I have 3 or 4 other angles to look at too.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's one of the things that we're finding about all UFO evidence now. Is there's a lot more UFO evidence since more people have cameras now. And unlike any other time in history, you know, just about everybody has a phone. That's not going to do the same job that your camera does, Joe, but people are capturing all kinds of weird information. Now, that undeveloped area, are there any caves or caverns or any bodies of fresh water there?
Yes, there are several smaller bodies of waters, all very smaller ponds. However, running along the edge of these wooded areas, it is an intracoastal waterway, so it runs along the coastline, but it's I would say about 2 miles from the coast. It runs parallel with the coast. But now there are a few smaller waterways that they are rivers by title, because they feed the ocean, but they're not that large of rivers for no sorts of sailing. You know, maybe smaller boats. Maybe 10, 20 feet deep, 100 feet across, things like this. But what's very interesting to me, because I had really looked into this area physically and on the research end, was I found a lot of crater-looking things. They look
Carolina Bays.
Yes, sir, Carolina Bays. So I came across these Carolina Bays, and I started asking people about them here, and no one knew what the heck I was talking about. and I couldn't believe that. I said, everyone, this highway here, Highway 31, is known as the Carolina Bay Parkway. And everyone started telling me, they said, well, you're not going to see a sign around here that says that. And since then, they're right. There's nothing around here that says Carolina Bay Parkway. It's just on a map.
Yeah, for folks who don't know, the Carolina Bays are a series of thousands of kind of crater-shaped depressions around North and South Carolina, the border of North and South Carolina there. And nobody knows the true origin of them, but some scientists speculate that maybe they were formed during a huge meteor or comet shower that broke up and impacted the Earth there.
I thought that was pretty much well determined to be the case now, and that they had even narrowed it down to a date, which I believe was like 12,000 years ago. I thought that was accepted now as probably the case.
In regards to these bays, there has been at least 6, well, there's been a lot, but at least 6 Ivy League universities have done studies on them. Interestingly enough, all done under the request of NASA. These findings and documents still exist. Now, what's really interesting is there's still no evidence of any impact at all, except for the crater shapes themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's why some people speculate it may have been a comet that broke up. And
because we also have to remember this is I live in an entirely sandy area, so in time a lot of these should have at least lost their shape. Where the interesting thing about all of these, and Scott, I should say I'm very impressed because very few people know about the Carolina Bays. They all face the same direction and they're elliptical. But now for the geological difference for them is what's really interesting is in these craters they have the rims of the craters are a different color sand. It's very white sand as opposed to the rest of the whole county. Even within the crater, the interior and the exterior of the crater are grayish color sand, but the rims are white. The white sands were tested, and they're tested. Their quotes are incredibly high levels of a lot of the transition metal groups, the platinum groups, iridium, palladium, osmium, a lot of these groups, but specifically these were used for, believe it or not, as it turns out, NASA uses a lot of these metals for high heat applications. These are the same metals that you would use to make crucibles to melt metals at 4,000 or 5,000 degrees.
Wow. Some of those are found around the mounds as well, I believe, the serpent mounds and things like that, like iridium.
I wouldn't be shocked. This iridium is the key one here, and that's had my focus. I mean, even NASCAR uses them to make their spark plugs. It's for high heat and durability. It's light, but it's brittle and light, but like an egg, if you use it right, it's very strong, and it has fantastic properties. It's one of the few inert metals that we're aware of naturally here that is on its own is a superconductor. Whereas if I had a wire made of iridium and a wire made of copper, and I sent 100 volts over 100 yards, the copper wire, let's say you'd be down to 85 volts, you'd have a little bit of loss. Whereas the iridium, you'd have 115 volts. You would actually gain, just from the natural properties of the metal from one point to another. So it's a very interesting element to begin with, and quite rare. So to have it in abundance is very, very rare. It's actually 100 times more likely I would find that much gold, and 1,000 times more likely I'd find platinum, which was odd.
So what do you think that points to, Joe? Do you think that points to perhaps some kind of extraterrestrial origin, that that material was deposited there, or?
Well, you know, I'm a very curious guy, science-based mind, and I definitely like reasoning, and I understand that there will be things that I can't grasp, but I can't help but think there's some sort of tie. I know our top minds and top study fields today, this particular element is of high interest. And this particular element, too, the iridium, this has at least 2 different times in our history that we speak of quite often. And we have the YK boundary, and we have, all the iridium layer that gives us proof that, well, I can't say proof, but gives us the evidence that a large meteor or catastrophe based from above wiped out the dinosaurs in early life. because of the thick black iridium layer that's around the world. A lot of these are found created by an impact, where a lot of the silicone and the little minerals in the sand are basically smashed into iridium from the high pressure and the high heat. But the only thing that leaves these scientists baffled in regards to the Carolina Bays is we don't have that iridium smash. We just have it mixed in with the sand. There's no vitrification. It's just like blown around like sand would be, and as opposed to other impacts, under these craters, there's no basin. A lot of times in similar geography, the sand would be compacted, and you'd basically have like a black, hard iridium bowl. Just a large bowl that would fill with the sand, and maybe immediately after or much later as the winds and water take it. But these here don't have any of those qualifying factors to show an impact. But however, there are tens of thousands of these things. I mean, they are
everywhere. What's weird about the Carolina Bays is that is the only region where the Venus flytrap occurs naturally. And some people speculate that because the Venus flytrap is so different than other plants on Earth, it has one of the fastest plant motions, the closing of those jaw-like leaves. Some people speculate that perhaps they were deposited there through the same event that created the bay.
I know.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
Yeah.
So essentially, this is leading back to a panspermia type situation potentially, where we did have an asteroid or a comet or some form of extraterrestrial object exploding either above the ground or impacting the ground, and potentially leaving these exotic elements and Venus flytraps and jellyfish. I mean,
that's exactly right.
Plasma balls.
Arthur C. Clarke and Carl Sagan both speculated that when we looked at giant gas planets like Jupiter or or the moon Europa, that we might find creatures living in the atmosphere like giant jellyfish.
Sure.
Now, I mentioned before about how jellyfish have the different forms of their life cycle, and at some phases they are very durable. They can withstand incredibly harsh conditions. Well, in 1994, I don't know if you guys remember the comet Shoemaker-Levy.
Of course.
It smashed into Jupiter, and it shot. They said it exploded. One piece exploded with more force than the Earth's entire nuclear arsenal, and it shot tons of debris out into space. Now, suppose those kind of creatures did that there, and suppose they had some kind of seeds or spores or dormant forms of the organisms, and that stuff was shot out into space. Now, might some of it actually drift down to the Earth's atmosphere, and when finding a warm, moist home there, actually spring back to life and create some kind of UFO wave? We don't know. That's the kind of exploration that's taking place right now in the upper atmosphere. They're doing studies in the upper atmosphere looking for the possibility of bacteria and viruses coming down from outside our planet. But I don't know if anybody's looking for jellyfish eggs yet. So,
well, I guess here, let me just say this: the idea. I'm sorry, John. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
Scott, where this takes me back, when I think of our discussions, where this ultimately takes me back to is, it may not have to be an invertebrate in the form of a jellyfish or a squid, but maybe you are on to the general idea, which is correct, and that there are new types of life forms that are indigenous to here, or originated through panspermia that we are just not aware of, and they're quite adept at living within the air. And maybe their origin is alien, maybe it's not, but it's a whole new way of thinking about a different form of life that could even be energy based and maybe not an organic sense in the way that we might think.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that frustrated Joe, and one of the things that the real opening that I see is that nobody's really studying the atmosphere as a habitat right now.
Right.
And I'm proposing that we expand the new science of aerobiology. Now, there is a science of aerobiology right now, but what it studies mostly is the distribution through the atmosphere of Earth-based organisms like spores from fungi and insects. And one of the big focuses was on preventing damage to crops and preventing the spread of disease. But nobody's really looking at the possibility that there might be megafauna up in the atmosphere. Now, we've just found in the past several years, scientists have studied clouds and found out that, oh yeah, there are actually some bacteria that are native to clouds. You know, they might live their whole lives in the clouds. Now, if there are bacteria up there, like kind of aerial plankton, who's to say that there might be larger organisms feeding on them up there? So that's a huge horizon for exploration right now. And
Scott, do you recall? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Do you remember in the early 2000s when there was the red rain in India? And
absolutely,
there were these kind of anomalous organisms that were discovered. I don't remember what ended up happening with that, but I mean, that was essentially, in some respects, an alien organism that was existing within our atmosphere, and we had no prior knowledge of it.
We just discovered some smaller bacteria forms in the stratosphere just about 2 months ago that were unknown to us before.
I'm going to make a prediction that if we start looking in the atmosphere, just about every habitat niche that we can find, we're going to find some new forms of life. Now, when Michael and I went out to Marfa, Texas, this was one of the first true field explorations looking towards an aerial phenomena with this viewpoint in mind. And we took out there an infrared truck, the FLIR, forward-looking infrared sensors. And when I found out we were going to have access to that, one of my predictions was that we might see visible light without seeing something on the infrared. And sure enough, we went out there and we actually found, we saw Marfa lights that showed up on the visible cameras, but that did not show up on the infrared sensors. And currently the only form of light that we know of that doesn't generate heat is bioluminescence. Because organisms that use bioluminescence, they're very efficient about using their resources to produce that light, so they don't generate a lot of heat. So that was kind of we were really fortunate and really had some groundbreaking results out there. It was really an amazing experience. But that was the first time that we actually went out. Now imagine what's going to happen when we start looking around more.
Scott, what was remarkable was that, this is in the body of a television show, of which we only had a half hour. So we couldn't put everything that happened within the show into the special, but it was remarkable because in several cases we saw, which I have no explanation for what they were, but they seemed to be these undulating balls of light that were essentially on the desert floor. And then at one point we were looking at multiple balls of light near that farmhouse. And at first people were thinking, well, maybe it's a campfire or whatever, but the local rancher, and I grew up on a farm as well. It's like, listen, in an arid situation, you do not have campfires out there. Plus, I'm sorry, that was not a campfire. These balls of light, they would split apart, they would morph back together, and it was literally the strangest thing that I've ever seen. And, we would see animals, you'd see wild boars, antelope, etc. Oh, we got to tell the antelope story too, Scott. But I mean, it was mad. It was incredible what happened out there. And Scott was exactly correct. I mean, we had lights that showed up without heat associated.
It was amazing, and to watch the scientists that we were with, they were all like little kids. They were so excited. They were seeing something they had never seen before. The guys that were running the infrared truck, they were like, oh yeah, we've been on a lot of expeditions looking for Bigfoot and stuff. We've never seen anything. And the one guy was like, I've never seen anything like this before. I'm amazed.
That's right.
It was really quite a lot of fun. But we were out there. We had access to one of the biggest ranches out in that area. And the ranch manager, we asked him, so anything weird happen around here? And he said, well, we lost a couple hundred antelope last year. And I said, well, what do you mean you lost them? Did predators take them? And he said, well, we didn't see any trace of them. And I said, well, no bones, no skins, none. Well, he said, maybe
no carcasses.
No carcasses. I said, well, maybe did they run off to a neighboring ranch? He said, no, they didn't. Neighbors would have told me if they ran off. And
this was the talk of the town.
And so I mentioned the possibility, well, maybe something's coming down out of the sky and grabbing them for a snack. And he kind of looked at me like he didn't say anything. And the next day I said, hey, what's on your mind? And he goes, well, you told me something's coming down out of the sky grabbing my antelope.
Yes. It was incredible. I mean, they do have a ton of these animals running around out there, and we saw them. And this situation that he was describing happened only 3 to 4 years ago. And these are people that work the land. These are people that know how livestock and animals exist, how they move around. It's a small town. Everybody knows everybody. This was the talk of the town. 3 to 4 years ago, several hundred head of these antelope just disappear. And the first thing I asked him, I was like, well, wait a minute, no bones, no carcasses. And he said no. And it was an extraordinary story. Another thing that he told us, which I have no explanation for, was that first it was a fiberglass tank filled with several hundred gallons of water, was found to have been exploded. And he goes out there because one of his ranch hands comes back and says, hey, that water tank we just put out there is exploded. He goes out there and sure enough, there's shards of fiberglass for hundreds of feet around this place. And Dave, that was the gentleman's name, correct, Scott? It's been a while. Yeah, well, Dave said that, I just figured it was lightning. And he got hit by lightning. Seems like a plausible idea. And he showed me the pictures of what he was describing. So they came back and replaced that with a 1/4-inch steel tank that they had built. And it was just a matter of days later that yet again something very strange happens. And if you imagine, for those who dip Copenhagen or Skull, those flat discs, that's what this steel tank looks like. It's just a round container, flat on the top and the bottom. Well, he goes out there, a week later. Now this thing has changed into a shape in which it is bowed on the top and the bottom. When you have a soda pop or a beer can that has been tapped or whatever, and the top and the bottom rises, that's what had happened to this tank, except that this is 1/4-inch steel. And
now, he had said that this thing tapped into an underground well. So it was almost as if something was inside the tank and it busted the tank to get out.
That's right.
One of the fascinating things about that area is they have huge, that whole area is a limestone caldera, and they have a huge underground network of wells under there. In fact, a lot of areas have water conservation districts. They have an underground water conservation district. So the possibilities of where these things might live might include some kind of subterranean habitat for part of their lives. So think of the idea of they capped this entrance to this underground aquifer, and this thing had to get out, and it busted the tank a couple of times to get it. Now I'm not saying that's what happened, but this guy talking about this tank being busted a couple times within a couple of weeks is certainly something to think about.
And listen, 1/4-inch steel is a highly durable substance, and for it to explode outwards, it's just remarkable to me. And the other thing that I don't understand about it is, the top and the bottom were welded, so you would think that the area of the container that would be the most fragile would be the welded seams. I would think. I'm not a physicist, but it's just an extraordinarily strange situation that, in my opinion, there is no logical answer for. And those are some of the things that happened in Marfa that we could not explain. And the other thing that we got very, very lucky about is the fact that something even happened at all, because Scott and I had both, read a lot of material, and Scott's also been to the Brown Mountain Lights, correct, as well, right, Scott?
Oh, cool.
That's right. Yeah.
And these things, it's like shooting UFOs. I mean, you can't predict when these things are going to happen. I was very, very scared that we would go out there and nothing would happen. And over the nights that we were there, several very strange things happened. We did witness the lights. We got them on camera. We got them through the FLIR technology. So, something is happening there. It's not, I don't believe there's anything extraterrestrial happening there, but everything's on the table. I could be dead wrong. And given more data in the future, I would be glad to take that back. But I will say, I really don't think that the Brown Mountain Lights, or Marfa, or Hessdalen are extraterrestrial in nature. I would be more likely to believe an organic-based situation such as Scott is describing, or an energetic plasma-type base like James Bunnell is describing.
Well, this is exactly what I had been saying, and I still stick to it, that when these things light up the orange ones, that's what it looks like to me. It's some sort of energy, because to this day, I still cannot say that I've seen any kind of craft, any metal. I haven't seen, it's just lights. I haven't seen anything that confirms to me that all of these lights are of one unit, or separate for that matter. However, I describe all the white flashing. Now, when they turn orange, in the first few times I saw them, I wasn't sure if when they were glowed this bright orange, if they were taking off away from me, or if they were just basically going to, closing down to nothing, essentially just going to a dot and disappearing. And I no longer think that they're shooting away from me really fast. However, that could be. But, I've now looked at them from several different angles, so I find it a little not plausible for them to always be shooting directly away from me, no matter my location.
That might be even an optical illusion as the light fades. Light fades, it seems like they're getting farther away, but they might not actually be getting farther away. I think the only way to find out more about this kind of thing is to, get out there and try and get a closer look. Whether it's at Marfa or Brown Mountain or North Myrtle Beach, these things happen. They happen regularly. But I don't know if anybody's looking at them as a naturalist, and that's what I'm hoping, we might get a chance to do, is get out there and actually get a real close look at these things.
Well, I have here, guys, from what I was talking about earlier, about some organisms found in the atmosphere. And what it was last year, when the last Perseid meteor shower went by, a professor from Sheffield University, he sent up a high-altitude balloon at an altitude of 27 kilometers. And the balloon was carrying, its whole load was sterile microscope slides. He wanted to see if he was going to find anything. And when it came down, they found something similar to an aquatic algae on the microscope slides, and it had not been identified at the time of this article here in March, and it's still suspected that these organisms came from space.
Is that from the Center for Astrobiology?
This is from livescience.com.
Okay, but I'm just wondering, there's an organization over I think in Wales, and the gentleman who runs is named Chandra Wickrem Singh. He was a partner of Fred Hoyle, who was a Royal Astronomer of Britain.
He's in this article as well.
Yeah. Okay, and they're one of the proponents of the idea of panspermia, that there's life everywhere. So, I think it's a fascinating frontier, and it's just, if you start looking to the sky with the idea of, like I said, a naturalist, just try and look at, and I would encourage people to go back and look at some of the best UFO reports. Some of the ones that you had multiple witnesses, where there's visual evidence, where it's not just one person saying, oh, this happened to me, where multiple people saw these things. Go back and look at these things with the idea, what if these are organisms? And some of these reports, they just click. It clicks. They make perfect sense. The Mothman, the Flatwoods Monster, all these things, they make perfect sense. They're so puzzling otherwise, but they make perfect sense if you think that they're actually some creatures that we're just getting a glimpse of as we walk around on the surface of the Earth.
Well, Scott, I agree with you, and I just wanted to clarify earlier, because I don't want people to be upset with me. When in the first hour we were discussing video and photographic evidence, I'm not trying to pick on that. What I was trying to say was that when I would see certain types of photographic or videographic evidence that displayed these objects that didn't seem to behave with any particular form or reason, it was very difficult for me to accept that was a strong candidate for some type of extraterrestrial vehicle. To me, it looked like it looked like something that could be biological, or it is something blowing in the wind, or perhaps it is insects. But regardless, it did not look like some form of craft that is being navigated by an intelligent type entity of some sort. So I'm not trying to discourage anyone from going and getting further video evidence. Just the opposite. I'm just saying
it's so easily to be faked nowadays. There was an Australian fellow a filmmaker, who was actually funded by the Australian government to create hoax UFO videos and distribute them on the internet to make some kind of point about how how false beliefs spread. And I don't see the point of that. That just sort of pollutes the whole topic. But there's some amazing pieces of footage. Michael, you've probably seen the one from Nellis Air Force Base, where these are guys that were actually they're on the ground watching something in the sky, and they're using this high-powered lens. And this is in 1995. This thing's it's on YouTube. You can see it. But this thing, it's got lobes, and it's kind of translucent, and it shows up against the sun, and you can hear the servicemen going, "What the hell is that?" And they're watching it, and they said they analyzed the way this thing was moving, and it looked to them like it was checking them out as much as they were checking it out. But if you look at it, it doesn't look like a craft. It looks like some kind of organism. So there's a lot of cool footage like that. Just Joe, you mentioned about radar. I just wanted to point out that the inventor of ground-based radar, when he first started looking up in the atmosphere, he saw like these flocks of thousands and thousands of objects. And he said it didn't make any sense. He said they had to be some kind of atmospheric life. That was the only thing. This is the guy that invented radar. And he said the only thing that made sense to him was if these were some kind of organisms moving up there. And Michael, about the water tank that you were talking about, there's another fascinating story. In Australia, there was, in 1980, this rancher heard some commotion from his cattle. He went out and he saw this big, huge disc-shaped object about 30 feet across. It was orange, Joe, like orange and blue, and it hovered over an open water tank. And I don't know how many hundreds of gallons this thing had.
Well, I don't mean to interrupt you there, Scott, but we're running near the end of the show. But I wanted to. You brought something up here. This is not something I can say for myself, but people I trust very well have said this, along with many other people here. Is they say these things light up orange over water towers, because here we have. Now that is common. That is very common.
This thing, he went out the next day and he looked. The entire water tank was empty.
Wow.
There was just sediment in the bottom that was pulled up in the shape like of a cone, as if something had sucked it up like in a suction cup, like a funnel. So
that's outrageous. Because that's something I do hear, and someone I do trust very well, who I should be very clear had absolutely no interest in the topic whatsoever. Saw them, two of them light up this above a water tower, just above it, and he said when they lit up orange, they each one almost became the size of the top basin of the water tower, the spherical at the top. And
that's another thing. These things change size. They can expand and contract. And if you think if that's a mechanical craft, that doesn't make sense. But if you think of an animal that expands and contracts to propel itself, it starts to make a little more sense. That's amazing, Joe. You wonder if they sense what's inside or something.
Well, I talked to one guy here last summer, Mr. Miller, and he's an older gentleman. He's well into his 80s. And this guy really set it off for me, because he's lived in this area his whole life. He was this area started becoming developed in the 30s, and his family was here shortly thereafter. And he said him and his family have been seeing these orange lights here in this area his entire life. And
even before it was big, all built up, huh?
Oh, yeah. Wow. This gentleman said that he saw them his whole life, and then in the late 60s and into the 70s, they opened a military base here in Myrtle Beach. And they closed that base, if I'm not mistaken, in 91, maybe in 90. And this gentleman said that he was upset when they opened the base, because now every time he reported these lights, it was instantly a military base. And this guy last summer said, well, they closed that base over 20 years ago, and I still see these lights. And I said, hey, I hear you, and you've helped me out a lot to know this is nothing new, because there's these bays here and these strange lights, and then there's the trifecta is this over 100-year phenomenon of these Carolina booms or these Oak Island guns, they're known as.
Right.
Where you are, and I mean, I've heard some of these where you hear this boom and walls shake a little bit, things rattle. Just it's not. You instantly rule out fireworks. You know, it will make people come out of their house and ask their neighbors what the heck that was.
That is also common around the phenomenon of ball lightning. Sometimes they seem to disappear with a boom. And ball lightning is another atmospheric phenomenon that seems to act with intelligence. Now, what if you got an organism that can move so fast from a standing position that it zips away so fast that it actually creates a sonic boom? Like the crack of a whip is a mini sonic boom.
Yeah.
But that's what people say about ball lightning too. So who knows what's causing those giant
Well, I'll tell you, the booms, you could definitely find solid proof on those of a very consistent nature going well over 100 years back.
That's amazing.
The oldest stories and the oldest wives' tales around here from the old sailors who still hang around the shanties, they'll tell you that that's for over 100 years. That's the legend of Blackbeard the pirate's guns, because his ship sank right nearby here, and coincidentally last year they were just raising the cannons from his gun.
Wow!
But that was just a cool factor. I've only heard them 2 times, to be sure, where I heard it and said, okay, that must have been what it was. And sure enough, it makes the news. If anyone heard anything today, we've checked here, we checked there. The normal, they'll check everywhere. But it's just a boom, and it'll be reported for 50 to 100 mile circumference. It's really strange because you just don't know what direction it's coming from, and it just has a different kind of sound to it, and it's these things like the lights and the sounds around here. I was thinking it was just me in the beginning to a degree. Well, how could dozens of people not be seeing this?
It ain't just you, pal.
and it turns out, people don't like to speak up about it, or they see one person on the news talking about it. There's no need for them to at this point, and I understand. I was the same way. But it's becoming pretty passive to discuss these things around here. Now they opened the UFO exhibit museum here in Myrtle Beach. Is that
right?
Yeah, and they have a lot of interactive things to educate. It's really a child-based thing. It's pretty cool though, but. They did that, and I even hear them talk about these things on the radio, local radio around here. It's really, it's become...
Good evening, passengers. We are on our final approach to the electric pyramid, where your host Michael Parker will be joining you shortly. For the remainder of the flight, we ask that you keep your arms and legs inside the craft and your mind open, as we will encounter the turbulence of new ideas and fresh perspectives. If at any time the alternative viewpoints you absorb while inside the pyramid become too distressing, simply say to yourself, I'm happy. It's like a tomb without a roof. Good day.
Greetings, truth seekers, paradigm busters, new world order, civil disobedience, freedom fighters, free thinkers, higher mammals, good people of all types. How's it going? My name is Michael Parker, and welcome to the first episode of the Electric Pyramid, coming to you as always from a undisclosed location here in Hollywood, California. And in the words of Tony Stark, it is good to be back. I tell you what, I haven't been on the radio for a while, a few years, and my good friend and confidant and producer, Joe Kiernan, has asked me to come on board with the good people here at Freedom Slips. And I just want to say hello, Joe, and to the crew, and say I am really glad to be here.
Mike, can't be happier. I'm glad to be here. I'm very excited about this program. I'm happy to have you back on the air. Many people are. and I'm looking forward to a good program. I'm happy to be here, man.
Thank you so much. Nighthawk, everybody has been very cool to me, man, and getting us set up and ready to go. And I'm going to look forward to bringing you guys a lot of interesting information. One of my passions all my life has been looking into strange and unusual situations, mysteries. I'm a curious person, just like Joe, and I see things in a thousand shades of gray, and nothing is black and white. So hopefully we'll find some interesting things to talk about over the next couple of months. Next week, we've got Sylvia Schultz. She is a paranormal investigator. We're going to be talking about her new book, which I believe is Fractured Spirits. And we've really just got a lot of good people coming on board. Chad Meek is going to be with us in a few weeks. He's going to be talking about his uncle, Van Tassel, and his new movie regarding the Giant Rock. And we've also got some stuff about Laurel Canyon and the ties between the rock and roll scene of the late 60s, early 70s, and a possible tie to the military-industrial complex. So that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. We've got a lot of really good shows. We're going to talk about a lot of different kinds of topics. We don't want to be stuck in one rut here. And we want to always think critically and keep a smile on our face and have fun and hopefully inspire the audience to do the same and ask questions.
Well, it sounded good, man. I'm really looking forward to those shows, especially Laurel Canyon.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting because I've worked for some of the people in question before, so I'm going to have some questions about those artists as well, and that's going to be a really good one. The author is LA-based, so he knows his stuff. So that's going to be, I believe, on June 12th. But today I want to kick this thing off. I don't want to hold anybody up with chit-chat. I want to get right to it. So the first thing we're going to do, you guys, in my old show, if you ever listened to Dark Matter, which was several years ago on a different internet radio station, I always like to start out the show with just a few interesting things that have happened during the week that I've seen in the press. And here in Southern California, this week was actually pretty dark and pretty depressing. There was another mass shooting here in Southern California, and that is something that we're not going to get into tonight because there's plenty of other places to hear about that. It's a really terrible incident, and so we're not going to go into that tonight. But we're going to keep it light and start with a few interesting stories. And after we do that, we're going to bring on our guest for the evening, my friend and colleague Scott Deschaine, who I was lucky enough to get to work with towards the end of last year in Marfa, doing an investigation of the Marfa Light. So he'll be coming on shortly and for the remainder of the show. And right now, I'm just going to get started with some of the craziest things I saw in the news this week. This first story comes to us from India. It was in the Telegraph. A guy, Dean Nelson, was reporting this out of New Delhi. The family of one of India's wealthiest Hindu spiritual leaders are fighting a legal battle over whether he is dead or simply in a state of deep meditation. His Holiness Sri Ashutosh Maharaj is the founder of a religious order with an estate worth an estimated $165 million. His wife and son claim that he died in January of a heart attack, but his disciples at the ashram have refused to let the family take his body for cremation because they claim he is still alive and has simply drifted into a deeper form of the samadhi meditation he promotes as a pathway to self-realization. So they've frozen his body. They're going to preserve it for when he wakes up. And his body is currently contained in a heavily guarded commercial freezer at the ashram. Yeah.
Wow.
So this guy, his family says he's dead. His followers say he's just meditating. I think he's probably dead. But according to one of his aides, who asked not to be named, Maharaj has been in deep meditation. He has spent many years meditating in sub-zero temperatures in the Himalayas, and there is nothing unusual in it. He will return to life as soon as he feels, and we will ensure his body is preserved until then. His wife and son have filed a court application calling for an investigation into the circumstances of his death and for his body to be released for cremation. His son claims his late father's followers are refusing to release his body as a means of retaining control over his vast financial empire. So imagine that. It's all about the rupees.
It sounds like Ted Williams. They had to pass his head around a few times. But
That's right.
I know he's frozen somewhere. Yeah.
That was the baseball player in the cryogenics, right?
Right. I think the son wanted to keep the head and didn't care too much about the body or something like that.
Amazing. So, Joe,
what is amazing about this, though? I mean, if the man's been preserved, I'm assuming prepared for death, that there's still an argument whether there's meditation.
Well, here's what's interesting. The Punjabi police, they initially confirmed that he was dead. A high court later dismissed the status report, and they said it's a spiritual matter, and the Guru's followers cannot be forced to believe that he is dead.
All right.
So
that's some deep meditation, my man.
That's very deep, and
very honorable.
I'm guessing he's not going to come out of that, but I could be wrong. In far less surprising news, in New York City, they are launching a war on rats. They are going to target these so-called rat reservoirs, which are areas where rodent populations survive and thrive, such as subways, sewers, and city parks. I'm not sure how they missed the city hall, but one city council member described the rat problem as an epidemic. The city will hire new inspectors and spend $600,000 for rat indexing to track and reduce their population. I suppose that's preferable to rat profiling, which is insensitive. It's welcome news for many city residents who claim the rats, some the size of small dogs or cats, are running rampant in their neighborhoods. One person said, when I walked out the other morning and there were like 6 rats running around, I just said, I'll never get used to this. Another man in Washington Heights said that I see about 20 rats a day. One woman said that the rats have infested her building on 154th Street where one rodent bit the neighbor's daughter. They're taking over. It's madness, she said. A sanitation worker said he had to shake and kick bags of garbage to scatter the rats for fear they'll jump up and bite him. Well, all this sounds like New York to me, and I'm not bagging on New York. I love New York, but it reminds me of the brilliantly prophetic words of another early 70s wise man, Mr. David Bowie, who certainly knew his way around the Big Apple, and he had this to say. Joe, can you drop that beat for me?
The size of rats and rats the size of cats, and 10,000 peoploids into small trials.
Oh my God!
To the sterile cats, and we got packs of dogs assaulting the glass fronts of lavender, ripping open, racking linked and shiny.
Joe, those were simpler times.
Those were the easy days.
Those were the easy days.
Those rats have grown tremendous since I've left.
They are an invasive species unto themselves, and they've moved in, and they're growing. All right, so our last news of the day comes to us from the Amarillo Globe News. It's reported by Russell Anglin, and this is a story of commitment. It's a story of dedication, a triumph of the human will in the face of severe adversity. On Monday, Molly Schuler ate 72 ounce steak dinners in fewer than 15 minutes at the Big Texan Steak Ranch in Amarillo, Texas. We witnessed history, Big Texan owner Danny Lee said. If there's a zombie apocalypse, I want to stay away from that girl. She walked in here, and she's one of the damnedest, smallest ladies I've ever seen try the 72-ounce steak. Schuler is a competitive eater from Bellevue, Nebraska, and she finished her first medium-rare steak in less than 5 minutes to set the record for the fastest time to eat the dinner and the sides, including a baked potato, shrimp, a salad, and a bread roll.